So I think the most bizarre thing about this Kabir Singh controversy is how rare the term satire is being used. Like, I don't know if I heard it even once in this 50-minute film companion discussion. And I think that's a reflection of how difficult it can be to apply our critical thinking to things that make us feel uncomfortable. Let me give you an example. Back in 1991, the world was introduced to a very controversial book called American Psycho. It attracted so much protest that selling the book was banned for years in Germany and parts of Australia. In fact, to this day, you can't sell this book in Australia unless it's shrink wrapped, like a Playboy magazine or a sandwich. 9 years later, followed by more controversy, we got the cult classic film that we know and love today, American Psycho, starring Christian Bale as a psychotic serial killer named Patrick. Now, currently, in 2019, it's taken for granted that American Psycho is practically a piece of feminist canon. On the surface, it's a satire on the materialism of 80s corporate America, but at bottom, it ridicules the extremes and excesses of masculine aggression, misogyny, and dandification, or in today's terms, toxic masculinity. However, remember all that controversy that I just mentioned about the release of American Psycho? Well, that controversy was based around all the violence and misogyny that occurs throughout the story, which was kind of understandable because Patrick does some pretty horrifying things to women, especially in the book. But just because some things were triggering and disturbing doesn't change the fact that the story is a satire. And so the protesters either didn't catch the satirical voice of the story because they were too busy being disgusted and outraged, or they knew it was satire but felt that the writer was simply hiding his misogyny within a satire of misogyny. What? Now, there are a million examples I could give you of how depiction is not endorsement, but I'm sure you can come up with examples on your own. Plus, at this point, you might have a question or two that you really want to ask, and they sound something like, is Kabir Singh really a love story that satirizes male fantasy and aggression? Yes. Told through the perspective of someone who probably has a personality disorder? Yes. Isn't Sandeep just a mediocre filmmaker who's Kabir in real life, and this movie is simply a way of expressing his erotic hatred for women? No. Are you suggesting that Sandeep is not an idiot? That he might understand movies better than me? A certified Rotten Tomato film critic? A certified film critic? Yes. Are you just trying to defend Kabir Singh because you love it? I'd rate both movies somewhere between an 8 to 8.5. I like it, but I don't love it. Is Bharadwaj India's best movie critic? Yes. Favorite stupid baby? Rick. So you're saying that by combining themes from satires like American Psycho and Goodfellas, while borrowing from Shakespeare and Hindu mythology, the director wanted to create a layered story that, unlike the typical modern movie, can be understood on more than one level of analysis? Yep, that's exactly what I'm saying. Let me explain. By the way, I'm Gianni, and there's a spoiler warning. Okay, before I begin, I want to mention that this is just going to be about the first act of the movie, not only because it's what all the controversy is about, but the first act is where all the different genre elements are thrown at you. The rest of the movie is much easier to follow given the traditional hero's journey structure, which is how it should be. Also, from here on, I'll mainly be referring to Arjun instead of Kabir for a few reasons, one of which is that most of the footage I have to work with are from the former. So here we go. Arjun Reddy is about Arjun, an alcoholic surgeon who's heartbroken that his ex-girlfriend Preeti has married someone else. Right away, we're presented with a similar theme from American Psycho, where Arjun views women as mostly objects. No different from a designer suit or a business card, this lady's dress is a blanket, and the girl that's his booty call is simply listed as the fiancé of a patient. Following that, which is where the controversy begins, we are shown in a clearly tongue-in-cheek manner how cool Arjun is with his over-the-top drinking and smoking. And this girl clearly loves it. She loves Arjun's over-the-top style so much that she's trying to get laid on the same day that she's meeting her fiancé. And she later claims that she doesn't want to spoil her fiancé's mood, as if she really cares. So already the movie's hinting to us that just like in American Psycho, this world and the people within it are not normal. In addition, this universe we're in is also taking a special interest in Arjun. Watch how as soon as his behavior becomes questionable, the lights go out. Then as he escalates, the lights magically come back on, making him come to his senses. This shows that the story is clearly aware of Arjun's transgressions because no writer would ever engineer a causal chain like this by accident. So after Fracture Case fiancé kicks Arjun out, we're introduced to Arjun's friend Shiva through a funny phone conversation that further reminds us Arjun is being satirized. You know, in case we forgot already. After Arjun cools off, we meet his housekeeper, and just like the girl we first met, she's not quite normal either. In fact, she's really kind of a dick. She ridicules Arjun for talking to his dog, knowing that the dog is a sentimental reminder of Arjun's ex, which is clearly meant to be an over-the-top insult because we all know that dog owners talk to their dogs, let alone pretend that their dog is an ex-girlfriend. In addition, you find out later on that the housekeeper keeps dropping stuff and breaking them, but she only ever drops Arjun's drinking glasses, which is another indication that this world takes a special interest in Arjun. This same invisible god, if you will, is why Arjun immediately injured himself after chasing the housekeeper around. Anyway, so we're about to see Arjun arrive at work, and before he gets there, his assistant is preparing a drink for him as if it's a morning cup of coffee, while telling the other assistant to be careful about the 4-hour operation coming up. The irony of that, coupled with this awkward attempt at getting a quickie in, is clearly indicative of the movie's satirical tone. So then we get this short exposition of the operation, which includes Arjun explaining to the patient how they have to break his leg first in order to fix it, which is a reference to how this movie or universe intends to fix Arjun. After the operation, we get this shot, which is meant to be comedic and a reference to Patrick smoking after performing his own surgery. Next, we get a flashback to his med school days, where a fight will break out in the middle of a football match. But we see how it ends first, with Arjun and his friends, whom are all doctors, ironically cleaning their battle wounds with whiskey. And just in case the parodic nature of this scene wasn't obvious, this scroll describes for us what's happening. So it turns out the fight started because the Arjun equivalent of the rival med school punched Arjun over some relatively polite taunting. Now look at this fight closely. This action scene is not a typical expression of masculine fantasy. First of all, the partial slow motion and the wide framing really pushes us to notice the bystanders, who, like us, are simply watching this occur. And this sort of creates a visual feedback that adds a layer of surrealism when you notice that the guy Arjun is fighting is not fighting back. Also, notice the way Shiva and Vidya are positioned behind Arjun's shoulders as if they're the good and bad sides of his conscience. Vidya has become speechless and powerless, while Shiva is encouraging Arjun to break the guy's face. But what's more is, this scene in American Psycho is when Patrick slays Paul Allen for having the best looking business card. Now, if this were truly a movie made to glorify the extremes of masculine aggression, we would be able to see the damage that Patrick is causing with his acts. But since the director, a woman named Mary Herron, had the intention of making a satire, she decided to keep the frame just on Patrick himself, which isolates the rage and irrationality away from the action that's taking place. And this has been referred to in a quasi-technical manner as the female gaze. It's an exaggeration of a natural psychological sex difference, in which men tend to look towards affect while women towards affect. Okay, so following the fight, the college dean immediately reprimands Arjun for his behavior and demands that he either writes an official apology or simply leave the school. Now, the response that Arjun comes up with is worth paying attention to for a couple of reasons. See, the dean is wondering why Arjun couldn't keep his anger under control in order to protect the pride of the school. But for Arjun, if there's any school pride to be gained from winning a football match, then there can only be more pride gained from winning a fight. The reason he gives is that football is essentially a competition of passionate physical struggle. So if this is the kind of activity that the school is going to derive a sense of pride from, then it would be dishonorable to not have engaged in a true physical altercation. Now, I don't know if Sandeep has read Fyodor Dostoevsky, but this sort of high-level rationalization for immoral action is exactly what the 19th century novelist is best known for constructing. Dostoevsky, who's quoted at the beginning of the book American Psycho, was really a genius at demystifying what we often mean by evil. And one of the hallmarks of Dostoevsky is that he intentionally makes his despicable characters the most rational, thoughtful, or charismatic people in the story, which is why at the end of Arjun's speech, where he chooses to quit the school because he would rather maintain his pride, the students stand up in deference for their true leader. And that's the first of 2 points that I want to make about that speech. The other has to do with a story called Romeo and Juliet. So Arjun is about to turn in his papers for quitting the college when he sees Preeti for the first time. And without having said a word to her, he decides to stay in school, instantly reneging on all that stuff he said earlier about keeping his pride. This is almost certainly a callback to Romeo. If you remember, at the start of Romeo and Juliet, Romeo is heartbroken about being rejected by Rosalind. He's super emo, and all he does is mope around saying stuff like, "I have lost myself, I am not here, this is not Romeo." Romeo, he's some otherwhere. But just like that dramatic speech about pride that Arjun gives, Romeo instantly forgets about Rosaline the moment he sees Juliet. This was something that Shakespeare intentionally did in order to accurately capture the pure yet stupid quality of young love. And as genuine as their love grew to be, or as romantic as a double suicide is, the play's ability to present such a polarizing yet holistic picture about Romeo and Juliet's relationship is one of, if not the main reason why we still study it today. And if you would like more evidence that Arjun and Preeti are echoes of Romeo and Juliet, consider how campy this exposition was, which was made even campier in Kabir Singh. On top of that, both couples have their first kiss within hours of meeting each other. And before you mention that Preeti does not kiss back, neither does Juliet. Also, both Juliet and Preeti share a similar situation of having to resist their parents' decision on who they should marry. This meant that Juliet was motivated to find someone to fall in love with. So Shakespeare had this idea that maybe real love can sprout from cheap love. In the way that Romeo was in love with the idea of being in love, Juliet was looking for love as a way to defy her parents. Which I think the same thing can safely be said about Preeti, especially considering how she was staring at Arjun first. This little nuance though was unfortunately not reproduced in Kabir Singh. Despite being almost a shot-for-shot remake, I think Kabir Singh was meant to be a movie with much larger and louder motions than Arjun Reddy. Another cool little nuance in Arjun Reddy is when Arjun sees Preeti for the first time. This song that starts to play isn't a regular song. It's actually a Hindu mantra that invokes upon the goddess Lakshmi. In traditional Hindu weddings, the bride and groom are emphasized as the incarnations of Lakshmi and Vishnu. And so if the entrance of Preeti symbolizes for Arjun the coming of good fortune, then as Vishnu, Arjun is providing Preeti with protection and safety. Which is what he's really doing with the way he quarantines everybody away from Preeti. Yes, it comes off as really weird and regressive, but it absolutely qualifies as protection. And a couple more things in regards to mythology. A part of the Hindu creation myth is that Vishnu is constantly dreaming our universe into reality. That, I'm pretty sure, is what's being alluded to in the opening scene of the film, where the director recites a poem with cosmic imagery about universal oneness. In addition, Vishnu is commonly depicted wielding a mace as a weapon. In present time, we really have no need for maces, but maces do resemble bats, which is exactly what Preeti is holding for Arjun after she's harassed during Holi. Now, think about what we're really looking at. It might not be apparent because of her subdued personality, but Preeti is not looking for justice. She wants cold-blooded revenge. But also, there's a kind of symbolic suggestion being made here that Arjun and Preeti are complementary of each other. It's a lot like how in Jane Eyre, all the negativity that Jane would have hypothetically accumulated are suppressed and magnified through Bertha. Except here, we have Arjun's explosive temperament counterbalanced by Preeti's excessive passivity. They each have way too much of what the other one lacks, which is very relevant for this scene. Ladies and girls, if your boyfriend said that he wanted to marry you, but was too scared to stand up to his parents who disapprove of you, yet he begs you to stay so that you can argue with his parents for him, you better not slap him, cause that would be inappropriate. Rather, what you should do is... Speaking of violence, some internet commenters have stated that they're still concerned that a hero movie such as Kabir Singh might influence teenage boys to copy some of the awful things that he does. Now, that's an understandable concern. I mean, if some of those certified film critics couldn't deduce that this movie contains satirical elements, how would some idiot teenage boy figure that out? Well, the awful set of behaviors that we see Arjun and Kabir engaging in is not at all a representation of regular people misbehaving. The extreme levels of aggression and substance abuse exhibited by our special heroes are commonly referred to in psychology as cluster B symptomatology. And within cluster B is a disorder known as ASPD, which stands for antisocial personality disorder, often referred to as sociopathy. Psychopathy, which is what Patrick has, is essentially a far-off extension of sociopathy. And amongst the professions where you'll find the most psychopaths and sociopaths, CEOs rank number 1. 1, which is Patrick, and surgeons rank number 5, which is Arjun and Kabir, and soon to be Aditya. More importantly though, while sociopaths only make up 2% of the general population, they can account for anywhere between 35 to 47% of prison populations. By the way, that's Goodfellas playing on the projector. And that scene that's playing, that's where Tommy, who is a psychopath, kills a fellow mob member just for making a joke. It's probably the most barbaric scene in the movie, and I doubt the director left it there by accident. But I digress. The reason why I'm talking about any of this is because in order to qualify for an ASPD diagnosis, you must have had the prerequisite form of ASPD during your adolescent years, which is called conduct disorder. Kids with conduct disorder are the sort of troublemakers or bullies that you're afraid movies like Kabir Singh will encourage. And if that's the case, then you don't have much to worry about, because the sort of kids that would copy Kabir and Arjun are far from regular kids. If you know any kids or adults that remind you of Kabir and Arjun, and you truly care about the well-being of others, then try to get them some help, because even if they're doing well academically or professionally, their internal lives without any intervention is almost guaranteed to have a downward trajectory. ASPD and symptoms of ASPD are notoriously difficult to treat because those who have this problem often feel as if there's nothing wrong with them. If you'd like more information on ASPD, there's plenty of information on the web, and I've left some links in the description. And that's the end of this video. Like I said, this video was really just about the first act, and I'm sure there are a ton of references that I missed, but the ones I covered, I feel, were the most obvious indicators that this isn't a brain-dead movie like some people think it is. Nor is it really a retelling of Devdas. Also, one thing I'm not quite sure about is I think that the whole morphine overdose thing might have been a play on Romeo and Juliet. Like, what if Romeo never found Juliet? Then he couldn't kill himself next to her, so then Juliet would have had to marry Paris, and then Romeo develops a drinking problem. You get the idea. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm curious to know what you think. I've also left some links in the description on stuff that's related to satire. I think the controversy around this movie really shows how uncommon it is as a genre. There's a couple of my favorite satirical pop songs that I've put in there. One is about being a pop star, and the other one is about high school. Anyway, if you've enjoyed what you've seen here, then consider subscribing, and I'll see you next time.